The lights in the CNN studio felt different that night. Not the usual soft glow designed to make politicians look trustworthy. These were sharper, harsher, the kind that reveal every line, every tells, every bead of sweat that forms when someone realizes they've walked into a trap of their own making. Hillary Clinton adjusted her earpiece and smoothed the front of her navy blue pantsuit. Custom tailored, probably cost more than most Americans make in a month. She had that look. You know the one. The practiced smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. The posture that says I've done this 1,000 times before. The confidence of someone who thinks they've already won before the first question is even asked. She shouldn't have been so confident. Across the stage, settling into his chair with the unhurried ease of someone who's never been in a hurry in his entire life, was Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. 72 years old, rumpled suit that looked like it came from J.C. Penney circa 2003, reading glasses perched on his nose, a yellow legal pad covered in handwriting that looked like chicken scratches, but was actually a meticulously organized arsenal of documented facts. He looked like somebody's grandfather, the kind who tells stories about the old days and sneaks you candy when your parents aren't looking, the kind you'd underestimate. The kind you dismiss as just another folksy Southern politician trading on charm instead of substance. Hillary Clinton made that mistake. She forgot that this particular grandfather graduated magna cum laude from Vanderbilt, first in his class from Oxford, University of Virginia School of Law. She forgot that behind that aw shucks demeanor was a legal mind sharp enough to slice through 30 years of carefully constructed political mythology like a hot knife through butter. She forgot that in Louisiana, they don't just fish for bass. They fish for truth. And Senator Kennedy had been fishing in Clinton waters for 3 decades. CNN Town Hall was supposed to be safe territory. Anderson Cooper moderating, carefully selected audience. Half Democrats who'd nod along to her rehearsed talking points about fighting for families and breaking glass ceilings. Half Republicans who'd come to see if Kennedy could actually do to Hillary what he'd done to countless Biden appointees in confirmation hearings. That thing where he sounds like he's asking for directions to the Piggly Wiggly while systematically destroying someone's credibility. The network had billed it as America's future leadership and integrity debate. They had no idea how literal that title was about to become. Hillary walked out first, waved to the crowd, that practiced smile. She settled into her chair and crossed her legs, ready to remind everyone of her experience, her service, her decades of public life, ready to position herself as the elder stateswoman who still had so much to offer, ready to take a few gentle swipes at Trump and remind America why they should still care what Hillary Clinton thinks. Senator Kennedy walked out looking like he'd just come from a catfish fry, nodded to Hillary with genuine Southern courtesy, the kind that's so polite it's almost menacing, the kind that says I'm going to be real nice about this, but make no mistake, you're about to have a very bad evening. Anderson Cooper opened with a softball, something about public service and leadership, a question designed to let Hillary tout her resume, give her usual speech about her work as First Lady, as Senator, as Secretary of State, the script she'd been reciting for years. She launched into it, the familiar rhythm, the practiced pauses, the emphasis on key words, fighting for families, working for children, decades of service, glass ceilings. The future is female, all the greatest hits. Kennedy let her finish, didn't interrupt, just sat there with that friendly expression, nodding occasionally like he was actually interested in what she was saying, took a sip of water, consulted his legal pad, waited for her to finish. Then he leaned forward, and the temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. "Madam Secretary," he said in that slow Louisiana drawl that makes every word sound like it's being served with sweet tea and cornbread, "I appreciate that sentiment. Truly, I do. Public service is noble work, important work. But I'm confused about something, and maybe you can help me understand it because I'm just a simple country lawyer, and sometimes these complicated financial matters go right over my head." Hillary's smile didn't falter, but her eyes did something, a flicker, a calculation, the first hint that maybe this wasn't going to go the way she'd planned. Kennedy adjusted his glasses and looked down at his legal pad. You and President Clinton left the White House in 2001. You said y'all were dead broke. That's a direct quote, ma'am. Dead broke. Now, according to Forbes and other folks who track these things, y'all are worth somewhere north of $120 million today. That's a lot of money for people who have spent most of their lives in government service. He looked up. Those friendly eyes weren't so friendly anymore. I've been in the Senate for a while now. I make a good salary. $174,000 a year, same as you did when you were there. But I'm still driving a 2008 Ford pickup with 186,000 miles on it. The check engine light's been on for 2 years. My wife keeps telling me to get it fixed. I keep telling her it still runs. The audience laughed. A few people applauded. So I'm trying to figure out, Kennedy continued, his drawl getting a little more pronounced. How does government service make someone $120 million? Could you walk me through that math? Because if there's a trick to it, I'd like to tell my constituents back home who are working 2 jobs just to pay their light bill and put food on the table. Hillary's smile froze, like someone had paused a video mid-frame. And in that moment, in that fraction of a second, she realized she'd made a terrible mistake agreeing to this debate. What happened next wasn't a debate. It was a masterclass. A systematic, methodical, devastatingly polite dismantling of 30 years of carefully constructed political narrative. If you think that's an exaggeration, you haven't seen what a Louisiana lawyer with an Oxford degree and a tackle box full of receipts can do when he's been patient for 3 decades. Hillary thought she'd faced tough questions before. Republican committees, Fox News, debate stages. But she'd never met someone who could destroy you while sounding like he was just asking for recipe recommendations. Facts don't care about your pantsuit, ma'am. Facts don't care about your resume. Facts don't care how many times you've been on the cover of magazines or how many countries you've visited or how many speeches you've given. And Senator Kennedy brought all the facts. Delivered with a smile, Anderson Cooper tried to move on, tried to steer the conversation to safer topics. Tried to protect his guest from what was becoming a very public autopsy of her political career. Kennedy wasn't having it. Secretary Clinton, he said, before we move on, I need to discuss something that's been bothering me for years. It's about Benghazi. The word hung in the air like smoke. Now I know you're tired of talking about it. You've made that real clear. You've said it's been investigated enough, that it's time to move on, that there's nothing new to learn. But see, ma'am, I'm from Louisiana. We had Hurricane Katrina. When people died on our government's watch, we wanted answers. We didn't think those questions were inconvenient. We didn't think they were partisan. We thought they were owed to the families. He flipped a page on his legal pad. The sound of the paper was loud in the suddenly silent studio. September 11, 2012. 4 Americans died in Benghazi, Libya. Ambassador Chris Stevens, Sean Smith, Tyrone Woods, Glenn Doherty. You were Secretary of State. You were in charge of their security. You were in charge of the response. You were in charge of what happened next. Kennedy pulled out printed emails. He'd actually printed them out, old school style, stapled together, highlighted sections, tabs marking important pages. At 11:12 p.m. that night, about 2 hours after the attack started, you sent an email to your daughter Chelsea. Of course, you didn't use her real name in the email. You used Diane Reynolds, which I find curious, but that's another matter. In that email you wrote, and I'm quoting here, 2 of our officers were killed in Benghazi by an Al-Qaeda-like group. He looked up over his reading glasses. Al-Qaeda-like group. That's what you told your daughter that very night. Not a protest, not a spontaneous demonstration, not anything about a YouTube video. You told your daughter it was terrorism. He set down one page and picked up another. Then the next morning you had a phone call with the Egyptian Prime Minister. The notes from that call, which we obtained through the investigation, show you told him, and again I'm quoting, "We know the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film. It was a planned attack, not a protest." Kennedy set down the papers and looked at her. "So, ma'am, help me understand. You told your daughter it was terrorism. You told Egypt's prime minister it wasn't about a video. But then for the next 2 weeks, you and your administration told the American people, and more importantly, You told the families of those dead Americans that it was all about a YouTube video that nobody had ever heard of. A video that had maybe 300 views when this all started. He pulled out more documents. The man had come prepared like a lawyer preparing for trial, because that's exactly what this was. Pat Smith, mother of Sean Smith, she says you looked her in the eye at her son's coffin and told her it was the video's fault. You told her they'd arrest the filmmaker, that justice would be done. Charles Woods, father of Tyrone Woods, wrote in his diary what you said to him at Andrews Air Force Base. Quote, "We are going to have the filmmaker arrested." Kennedy's voice got quieter, which somehow made it more powerful. You blamed a filmmaker for your failures, ma'am, an American citizen who made a stupid video. You looked grieving mothers in the eye and lied to them. Hillary started to respond. Her mouth opened. Kennedy held up a gentle hand, polite but firm. "Now I'm not done. Susan Rice. She worked for you. She answered to you. She went on 5 Sunday morning shows and blamed the video. Who gave her those talking points? You did. Your State Department did. And we know from emails that were eventually released that you knew those talking points were false when you approved them." Kennedy leaned back in his chair, took off his glasses, cleaned them with his tie, put them back on. "So here's my question, and I'm asking it as simply as I know how. You told your daughter the truth. You told foreign leaders the truth, but you told grieving American families a lie. Why? Was it because it was 2 months before the 2012 election, and the Obama administration was running on a platform of Al-Qaeda is on the run? Was it politically inconvenient to admit that Al-Qaeda had killed 4 Americans on September 11th on your watch?" He looked at her with those eyes that had gone very cold. "Because, ma'am, where I come from, when you lie to a mother at her son's funeral, that's not a political strategy. That's evil. And I need to know, at what point did you decide those families deserved lies instead of truth?" The silence in the studio was absolute. You could hear the cameras, the slight hum of the lights. Someone in the audience shifted in their seat and it sounded like thunder. Hillary's voice when she finally spoke was tight, controlled, but you could hear the anger underneath. The situation was fluid. Intelligence was evolving. We were getting conflicting reports. "Ma'am," Kennedy interrupted gently, "your emails prove you knew the truth from the first night. That's not evolving intelligence. That's calculated deception. You knew, and you lied to grieving families at their sons' coffins. That's not fog of war. That's fog of politics." He consulted his pad again. Ambassador Stevens sent multiple requests for additional security in the months before the attack. Dozens of them. Cables, emails, formal requests through official channels. Your State Department denied them. Why? Was it because providing security would have contradicted the narrative that Libya was stable after your intervention, that your policy there was working? The audience was dead silent. Some people had their hands over their mouths. Others were leaning forward, hanging on every word. The CIA team on the ground later testified they were told to stand down. Military assets were available. F-16s in Aviano, special operations teams in Central Europe. They could have been there in hours. They weren't deployed until it was too late. Why? Kennedy looked up. You were in charge of all of that. The security that wasn't provided. The rescue that didn't come. The lies that followed. And when Congress asked you about it, you said, and I remember this real clear because it made my blood boil, you said, "What difference at this point does it make?" He shook his head slowly. "Ma'am, it makes all the difference in the world. It's the difference between a public servant who takes responsibility and a politician who deflects blame. It's the difference between someone who puts American lives first and someone who puts politics first. It's the difference between truth and lies. And you chose lies. You chose politics. You chose your career over the truth those families deserved." Hillary opened her mouth twice and closed it both times, like a fish gasping for air. Anderson Cooper tried to jump in with another question. Kennedy just smiled that southern smile and said, "Oh, we're just getting started." And folks, he was. Because Kennedy was just warming up. He was still being polite. He hadn't even gotten to the really good stuff yet. Share this everywhere if you remember those 4 Americans. If you remember their families. if you think accountability matters regardless of power or party. Because what happened next was even more devastating. Kennedy didn't wait for Anderson Cooper to ask the next question. He just transitioned seamlessly, the way a good storyteller does. The way a good prosecutor does when he's got a witness on the ropes and he's not letting up. While we're discussing truth and transparency, let's talk about your email server. Hillary's face did something. A micro-expression that lasted maybe half a second. But if you were watching closely, and Kennedy was always watching closely, you could see it. The flicker of "oh no, not this again" combined with the calculation of "how do I spin this one more time?" "Now, I'll be honest with you," Kennedy said, adjusting his glasses and looking down at his legal pad. "I'm not real good with computers. I still use a flip phone. Drives my staff absolutely crazy. They keep trying to give me a smartphone and I keep telling them I just need to make phone calls and this thing does that just fine." The audience laughed. The tension broke for just a second. "But even I know," Kennedy continued, "that you're not supposed to run the State Department's business through a server in your basement. So help me understand. Did you not know that was wrong? Or did you know and just not care?" He flipped through his legal pad. Each page was covered in notes, highlighted passages, dates, numbers. The man had done his homework. Actually, homework was an understatement. This was a dissertation. "See, when you became Secretary of State, you signed documents. I've got copies here. Documents acknowledging that you understood how to handle classified information. You took training, mandatory training. You knew the rules. You signed papers saying you knew the rules. You agreed to follow those rules." Kennedy held up the documents. But instead of using the government's secure email system, the system specifically designed for sensitive communications, the system with multiple layers of security and oversight, you set up a private server at your house in Chappaqua, New York, in your basement, connected to your private email address. He looked up. "Now some folks might think that's just convenient. But ma'am, the only reason to do that is to avoid oversight. Government emails are subject to Freedom of Information Act requests. Anyone can ask to see them. Government emails are archived permanently. They can't just disappear. Government emails can be subpoenaed in investigations. They're part of the public record. But private server emails, well, those are under your control. You decide what people see. You decide what gets preserved. You decide what gets deleted. That's not convenience, ma'am. That's concealment." He pulled out FBI reports, thick stacks of them, pages and pages of official investigation documents. The FBI investigated once this became public. They had to. And they found that you sent and received 110 emails containing classified information, not emails that were later classified, emails that contained information that was classified at the time you sent them. 8 of those email chains contain top-secret information. That's the highest classification level we've got. Information so sensitive that unauthorized disclosure could cause exceptionally grave damage to national security. Kennedy's voice got harder. "And you were running all of that through a server in your basement that wasn't protected by government security protocols. No encryption, no security clearance for the people managing it. Just a private company you hired to maintain your private server for your private emails about public business." "But here's where it gets really interesting," Kennedy said, his drawl getting more pronounced the way it always did when he was about to drop a bombshell. "March 2015. The New York Times breaks the story about your private server. Within days, the House Select Committee on Benghazi, which is investigating what happened in Libya, issues a subpoena for all your emails. That's not a request, ma'am. That's a legal order. A subpoena means you have to preserve and produce the evidence. You can't destroy it. You can't hide it. You have to hand it over." He looked at her over his glasses. 3 weeks later, your attorney and your aide go through your emails and decide, unilaterally, without any oversight, without any independent review, that 33,000 of them are personal. About yoga classes and Chelsea's wedding and planning dinner parties. That's what you said. Just personal stuff. Kennedy paused. Let that sink in. Then your IT specialist, a man named Paul Cometa, takes those 33,000 emails and deletes them using software called BleachBit. Another pause. Now I had to look up what BleachBit does because remember, I'm not good with computers. Turns out BleachBit is software specifically designed to permanently erase data so it can't be recovered. It doesn't just delete files like when you empty your recycling bin. It overwrites them multiple times with random data. It's what you use when you want to make absolutely certain that nobody can ever recover what you deleted. It's what criminals use to destroy evidence. Kennedy sat back. That's not cleaning out your inbox, ma'am. That's destroying evidence. And you did it after receiving a congressional subpoena. That's a crime. It's called obstruction of justice. And if you or I did it, we'd be in federal prison. He held up another document from the FBI report. The FBI also found that you and your staff destroyed 13 mobile devices that had been used to access the server. 13 phones and tablets. How did you destroy them? According to the FBI report, some were broken with hammers. Others were disposed of in ways that made them unrecoverable. Kennedy's eyebrows went up. Hammers, ma'am. Like you were trying to kill them. Like those phones had personally wronged you and you were taking revenge. The audience laughed nervously, but it wasn't really funny. It was horrifying. Now let me tell you what would happen if I did that. If I set up a private server to avoid oversight. If I conducted government business on it. If I got subpoenaed. If I deleted 33,000 documents. If I used special software to make them unrecoverable. If I smashed my phones with hammers. Kennedy leaned forward. I'd be in federal prison, wearing orange, sharing a cell with someone named Tiny. And if any of my constituents back home did that, they'd be prosecuted so fast it would make your head spin. The FBI would kick down their door. They'd be arrested. They'd be charged. They'd be convicted. And they'd spend years behind bars. He looked at her steadily. But you, FBI Director Kamai went on TV and gave a press conference. And he said you were, quote, extremely careless, which, by the way, is functionally identical to the legal standard of gross negligence that would have made this a prosecutable crime under the law governing classified information. But then he said, quote, no reasonable prosecutor would bring this case. Kennedy shook his head. That's not a legal standard, ma'am. That's a political decision. That's the FBI saying you broke the law, but we're not going to charge you because of who you are. That's a two-tiered justice system. That's proof that the rules don't apply equally. Hillary tried to defend herself. Her voice had an edge now. The practice calm was cracking. The FBI conducted a thorough investigation and cleared me of any wrongdoing. Kennedy's response was immediate, gentle but devastating. Ma'am, the FBI said you broke the law, but they wouldn't charge you. That's not being cleared. That's being protected. And I think the American people can tell the difference. He gathered his papers, straightening them on the table. You set up a private server to avoid oversight. You put classified information at risk. You potentially exposed national security secrets to foreign intelligence services. When caught, you destroyed evidence. You lied about it repeatedly. First, you said you never sent classified information. Then you said nothing was marked classified. Then you said you didn't know what classified markings meant. Every single statement was proven false. But you faced no consequences. Kennedy leaned forward, and his voice got very quiet. Ma'am, I'm from Louisiana. We've had some corrupt politicians down there. Edwin Edwards went to prison for selling state contracts. William Jefferson had $90,000 in cash in his freezer and went to prison for bribery. But even they never destroyed evidence with BleachBit and hammers. That's a special level of contempt for the law. That's someone who thinks they're above the law. That's someone who thinks the rules don't apply to them. He looked her right in the eyes. And you want us to think you should have been president. The studio was silent, except for the hum of the equipment and the sound of someone in the audience trying very hard not to applaud. 2 rounds in, and Hillary's famous composure was cracking like old paint. Her hands were gripping the armrests of her chair. Her smile was long gone, and Kennedy was just getting started, because the email server was just the appetizer. He hadn't even gotten to the main course yet. Kennedy shifted gears with the ease of someone who'd been doing this for decades. The legal pad came out again. A new section, more highlighted pages, more tabs, more receipts. Now let's discuss the Clinton Foundation. Hillary's face went very still, like she was trying to decide whether to fight or flee, but there was nowhere to go. She was on live television, in front of a studio audience, being broadcast to millions of people. She was trapped. "I think charity work is wonderful," Kennedy said, his voice warm and friendly again. "I truly do. My church back home raises money for mission trips. We help people in need, build houses, dig wells, feed hungry folks. Good work, important work." He paused. "But your foundation is interesting, real interesting, because it seems like everyone who donated big money to the Clinton Foundation got special access to you as Secretary of State. Now, that might be coincidence, but ma'am, I'm from Louisiana. We don't believe in that many coincidences back home. When you see a pattern repeated over and over, we call that what it is. A pattern." He pulled out donor lists and meeting schedules. The pages were covered in highlighter, yellow for donors, pink for meetings, green for policy decisions. "Let's start with the big one, Uranium One." The name hung in the air. Everyone knew what was coming. Russia wanted to acquire a Canadian company called Uranium One that controlled about 20% of America's uranium production capacity. To do that, they needed approval from several U.S. government agencies, including the State Department. "Your State Department." Kennedy held up financial records. "While this deal was being reviewed, while your State Department was deciding whether to approve it, Russian interests connected to Uranium One donated $145 million to the Clinton Foundation." Let me say that again. $145 million from Russians, while you were deciding whether to approve their uranium deal. He showed the timeline, dates, donations, meetings. The chairman of Uranium One, a man named Ian Telfer, donated millions through his family foundation. Other investors in the deal donated millions more, all while the approval process was ongoing, all while you had the power to approve or reject the deal. Then there's your husband. Kennedy pulled out more documents. In June 2010, while this deal was pending, Bill Clinton was paid $500,000 for a single speech in Moscow. Who paid him? A Russian bank called Renaissance Capital, a bank with Kremlin ties, a bank that was promoting Uranium One stock to investors. Kennedy looked up. Then your State Department approved the deal. Russia got control of 20% of American uranium production. The Clinton Foundation got $145 million. Bill got $500,000 for a speech. And you want us to believe that's all just coincidence? He pulled out more records. The pages just kept coming, like a magician pulling scarves out of a hat, except these scarves were evidence of corruption. But that's not unique. It's not an isolated incident. It's a pattern that repeated itself over and over during your time as Secretary of State. Here's a study that analyzed your meetings as Secretary of State. Of the 154 private individuals who met with you, 85 were Clinton Foundation donors. That's 55% of your private meetings going to people who had paid money to your family foundation. Kennedy let that sink in. Those donors contributed a combined $156 million, and they got meetings, face time with the Secretary of State, access to one of the most powerful people in the world. That's not access based on policy importance, ma'am. That's pay to play. Algeria, Kennedy continued, flipping pages. They were under restrictions for human rights violations. Then they donated $500,000 to your foundation during a time when foreign government donations were supposed to be prohibited. Shortly after, State Department policy toward Algeria improved. They got weapons deals. They got favorable treatment. Coincidence? He showed more examples. The list kept growing. Swedish telecom company Ericsson. They were facing pressure from your State Department to stop doing business with Iran. Sanctions enforcement. Then they paid Bill Clinton $750,000 for a speech and donated to the foundation. The pressure on Ericsson eased. They got exemptions. Coincidence? UBS, the Swiss bank. The IRS was investigating them for helping Americans hide money in secret accounts. Your State Department intervened. You personally met with UBS executives. The case was settled. UBS agreed to turn over information on only 4,450 accounts instead of the 52,000 the IRS wanted. Then UBS donated $600,000 to the Clinton Foundation and paid Bill $1.5 million for speeches. Coincidence? Kennedy pulled out Haiti files, photographs, newspaper articles, reports from investigators. Then there's Haiti. 2010 earthquake, devastating tragedy. Over 200,000 people died, millions were displaced, the country was destroyed. Your foundation raised over $30 million for Haiti relief. You were Secretary of State. Bill was appointed UN Special Envoy to Haiti. The Clintons controlled the relief effort. The response? The reconstruction. So where did that $30 million go? He showed investigative reports, pictures of protests in Haiti, signs in Creole and English asking where the money went. Haitian activists have been protesting for years. They say most of the money went to Clinton cronies, contractors with connections to the Clintons, companies owned by Clinton donors, luxury hotel projects for tourists, not homes for Haitians who lost everything. The Haitian people saw almost none of the money raised in their name. There are literally protests in Port-au-Prince with signs saying, "Where did the money go? Show us where the money went." Kennedy leaned back and looked at her. But here's the smoking gun, ma'am. The piece of evidence that proves what the Clinton Foundation really was. After you lost the 2016 election, Clinton Foundation donations dropped 90%. He let that sink in, repeated it for emphasis. In 2016, when you had power and might become president, the foundation raised $62 million. In 2017, after you lost, it dropped to $26 million. By 2020, down to $16 million, a 90% decline. Why would donations drop 90% if it's a charity doing good work? If it's really about helping people? If it's really about the mission? I'll tell you why. Kennedy's voice got hard. Because people weren't donating to charity. They were buying access to power. When you had power, money poured in. When you lost power, it dried up. That's not philanthropy, ma'am. That's what the FBI calls a criminal enterprise. That's a racketeering operation. That's selling government access and influence disguised as charity work. Hillary's face was red now. You could see the anger, the calculation, the desperate search for a way out of this. The foundation has helped millions of people around the world, she said. Her voice was defensive, tight. Kennedy's response was devastating in its simplicity. Ma'am, the foundation helped you and your husband get rich while you had power. When you lost power, the money stopped. That's not because you suddenly stopped helping people. That's because you had nothing left to sell. You monetized the State Department through your foundation. You sold access. You sold influence. You sold American uranium to Russia, and you called it charity. He shook his head. Even in Louisiana, we'd call that corrupt. And we've had some pretty colorful characters in Louisiana politics. 3 rounds in, the Southern gentleman was destroying her with a smile, with documented facts, with her own record. And he still wasn't done. Kennedy's expression shifted. The folksy charm was still there, but underneath it was something else now. Something harder. Something that made even people watching at home lean forward in their seats. "Secretary Clinton, I need to show you something." He gestured to the production crew, a screen lowered, a video queued up. "This is from 2011, after Muammar Gaddafi was killed in Libya. CBS News interviewed you." The video played, Hillary arriving for the interview, a producer talking to her off camera. Then the question, the news that Gaddafi had been captured and killed. Hillary's reaction was immediate. She laughed, threw her head back and laughed, then said with clear delight, "We came. We saw he died." Then laughed again, clearly pleased with her Julius Caesar reference, clearly proud of what had happened. Kennedy stopped the video. The room was silent. "Ma'am, you laughed about a man being killed." He let that sit there, let the audience absorb it. Now Gaddafi was a bad man, a dictator, a terrorist. He killed Americans. Pan Am Flight 103, Lockerbie, 270 people dead. He was responsible for terrible things. Nobody's defending Gaddafi. That's not what this is about. But you laughed. Kennedy's voice got quieter. And then, well, let's discuss what happened after you got your way in Libya. He pulled out policy documents, timelines, reports from intelligence agencies. You were the strongest advocate in the Obama administration for military intervention in Libya. President Obama was hesitant. Secretary of Defense Bob Gates opposed it, but you pushed hard. You wanted regime change. You wanted this as your foreign policy legacy. You saw it as proof that smart power works, that you could reshape the Middle East. Kennedy showed the timeline on the screen. March 2011, NATO starts bombing. October 2011, Gaddafi is captured and killed. You're on TV laughing about it. Mission accomplished, right? Then what happened to Libya? He pulled out reports, maps showing the chaos. Libya collapsed, completely collapsed. Multiple competing governments, militias fighting for control, civil war. By 2014, ISIS controlled significant territory there, including the city of Sirte, Gaddafi's hometown. By 2015, Libya became the main launching point for refugees trying to reach Europe. Hundreds of thousands fleeing across the Mediterranean, thousands drowning in the attempt, all because of the chaos you created. Weapons, Kennedy continued. Gaddafi had stockpiles, thousands of surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft weapons. They disappeared, spread across North Africa and the Middle East. They ended up in Syria, fueling that civil war. They ended up with terrorist groups. Your intervention didn't just destroy Libya. It destabilized an entire region. He held up humanitarian reports from the UN. By 2017, the UN documented open-air slave markets in Libya. Slave markets, ma'am. Black African migrants being bought and sold like cattle, being tortured, being held for ransom. In a country you liberated. Kennedy's voice dropped to almost a whisper, which somehow made it more powerful. That's your legacy in Libya. Slave markets, civil war, hundreds of thousands dead, millions displaced, weapons proliferation, ISIS expansion, the refugee crisis in Europe, all because you wanted a foreign policy victory to put on your resume. And then Kennedy continued, you sent Ambassador Chris Stevens into this chaos. You sent him to Benghazi, one of the most dangerous cities in your failed state. He asked for more security. Repeatedly. You denied it. And on September 11, 2012, he was killed in an attack that you later lied about. He looked at her steadily. Those eyes weren't friendly anymore. They were cold, prosecutorial. So let me ask you, ma'am, when did the laughing stop? You laughed when Gaddafi died. Did you laugh when Libya became a failed state? When ISIS took over? When the slave markets opened? When your ambassador was killed? When his body was dragged through the streets? At what point did you realize that maybe, just maybe, destroying a country without a plan for what comes next was a bad idea? Hillary tried to respond. Her voice had an edge of desperation now. Libya was facing a humanitarian crisis under Gaddafi. We had to act. Ma'am, Kennedy said, his southern courtesy wearing completely thin now. Libya under Gaddafi was stable. Not free, not democratic, but stable. They had the highest standard of living in Africa. Universal health care, free education. Women had rights that they didn't have in other Arab countries. It wasn't perfect, but it functioned. Now they have slave markets and civil war. Kennedy's voice rose for the first time all night. The humanitarian situation is objectively worse. You didn't save Libya. You destroyed it. You turned it into a failed state. And hundreds of thousands of people died because you wanted a foreign policy victory to put on your resume, because you wanted to prove you were tough, because you wanted something to campaign on. He gathered his papers. You had no plan for post-Gaddafi Libya. None. You just wanted regime change as a trophy. And when it all went to hell, when everything fell apart, you walked away. That's not leadership, ma'am. That's reckless arrogance. And a lot of people, including Americans, paid the price for your hubris. 4 rounds in, Hillary's experience was starting to look less like qualification and more like a catalog of disasters. And Kennedy still had more ammunition. The senator took a sip of water and adjusted his glasses, consulted his legal pad, found the section he was looking for, pages and pages of notes, highlighted passages, documented evidence. Ma'am, you talk a lot about defending democracy, about how important it is, about threats to democratic norms, about voter rights and fair elections. So let's discuss how you treated democracy in your own party's 2016 primary. Hillary's jaw tightened. She knew what was coming. Because from what I can tell, Kennedy continued, you didn't so much win that nomination as purchase it. He pulled out printed emails. The WikiLeaks dump from July 2016. Now I know you don't like WikiLeaks, and I understand that. The source is controversial, but those emails were verified as authentic. The metadata checked out. Nobody disputes they're real, and they showed something very interesting. The DNC, which is supposed to be neutral in primaries, which is supposed to give every candidate a fair shot, was actively working to help you and hurt Bernie Sanders. Kennedy read from the emails. DNC Communications Director Louis Miranda discussing how to plant negative stories about Bernie. DNC CFO Brad Marshall suggesting they attack Bernie's religion in southern states. Question his belief in God. Use the fact that he might be an atheist against him in states where that matters. Kennedy looked up. That's the Democratic National Committee, planning anti-Semitic attacks, to help you. He showed more evidence. The documents just kept coming. Then there's Donna Brazile. She was working for CNN as a contributor and serving as vice chair of the DNC. She sent you debate questions in advance. Before a CNN town hall in March 2016, she emailed your campaign the exact wording of a question about the death penalty. Before another debate, she sent a question about Flint's water crisis. Kennedy's voice got harder. You got the questions early. Bernie didn't. That's cheating, ma'am. That's rigging a debate. And when it was exposed, CNN fired Brazile. She initially denied it, called it false, called it Russian propaganda. Then in 2017, she wrote a book. And in that book, she admitted something remarkable. He read from the book. She said she investigated whether your campaign had rigged the nomination. And she found proof. She found an agreement, signed in August 2015, between the DNC and your campaign. This agreement specified that, in exchange for raising money for the DNC, Hillary would control the party's finances, strategy, and all the money raised. Her campaign had the right of refusal of who would be the communications director and would make final decisions on all other staff. Kennedy looked up. Ma'am, this was signed in August 2015, before the first debate, before the first vote, before any other candidates had even announced. You bought control of the Democratic National Committee a year before the primary started. He let that sink in. That's not a primary. That's a coronation. Bernie Sanders never had a fair shot because you'd already purchased the refs. And when DNC Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz was forced to resign over this scandal, Kennedy said, you know what you did? You hired her. Same day. She resigned in disgrace for helping you cheat, and you gave her a job as honorary chair of your campaign. That's not distancing yourself from corruption, ma'am. That's rewarding it. He leaned forward. So explain to me, how do you rig your own party's primary, get caught doing it, and then lecture America about defending democracy? That seems like what we call in Louisiana having some nerve. Hillary tried to defend herself. Her standard talking point. I won the primary by millions of votes, by nearly 4 million votes. After getting debate questions in advance, Kennedy interrupted. After the DNC put their thumb on the scale for you, after you bought financial control of the party, after the party leadership actively worked against your opponent, after debate schedules were arranged to minimize viewership, after your people attacked Bernie's religion. Ma'am, that's not winning, that's cheating. And you know what happened? Bernie supporters were furious. Many stayed home in November. Some voted third party. Some even voted for Trump. You suppressed your own party's turnout by being too greedy to let democracy work fairly. You couldn't risk losing a fair primary, so you rigged it. And it cost you in the general election. He shook his head. You couldn't even win a fair primary in your own party. You had to buy it. You had to control it. And now you want us to trust you with democracy. Ma'am, that's asking a lot. 5 rounds in, Hillary's democratic principles were in tatters, her composure was cracking, and Kennedy had more coming. 3 more devastating rounds to go. The senator paused. This was delicate territory. sensitive, but he wasn't going to avoid it. Not now, not after coming this far. Secretary Clinton, you've positioned yourself as a champion of women's rights. Women's rights are human rights, you famously said in Beijing in 1995. Beautiful sentiment, powerful speech. I agree completely. He paused. So I need to ask about something that's bothered me for years. How do you treat the women who accused your husband of sexual misconduct? The temperature in the room dropped. This was personal now. This was about her marriage, her choices, her complicity. He pulled out a list: names, dates, allegations. Paula Jones, sexual harassment, sued Bill Clinton while he was president. You called her trailer trash. Your team destroyed her reputation. Jennifer Flowers, affair that lasted years. You called her a liar, then Bill admitted it was true. Kathleen Willey says Bill groped her in the Oval Office when she came to ask for a job. You had your people investigate her, intimidate her, discredit her. Juanita Broaddrick claims Bill raped her in 1978 when he was Arkansas Attorney General. She stayed quiet for years out of fear. When she finally told her story, you allegedly approached her at a campaign event and said, "I want you to know that we appreciate everything you do for Bill." Kennedy looked up. She interpreted that as a threat, a message to keep quiet. Did you intimidate a rape victim, ma'am? Monica Lewinsky. Kennedy's voice got quieter. She was 22 years old, an intern. Your husband was President of the United States, 49 years old. That's a massive power imbalance. But when the scandal broke, when the blue dress came to light, you didn't believe the young woman. You went on TV and talked about a vast right-wing conspiracy. You blamed everyone except the man who'd abused his position. He showed clips, Hillary on the Today Show, defending Bill, attacking the investigation, claiming political persecution. You spent years destroying these women to protect your political partnership with Bill. Then decades later, during the Me Too movement, you positioned yourself as an ally. You said we should believe women. Kennedy looked at her steadily. Which women, Secretary Clinton? All women except the ones who accused your husband. That's not feminism. That's selective morality. You believe women when it's politically convenient and you destroy them when they threaten your power. He leaned back. Here's what everyone knows but nobody says. You stayed with Bill not out of love. Nobody believes that. Not after what he did. Not after the humiliation, not after the lies. You stayed because you needed his political network. He was governor, then president. That gave you the platform. First lady, then senator because of sympathy over the Lewinsky scandal, then secretary of state, then presidential candidate. You rode his coattails despite his behavior, because your ambition was more important than your principles. Kennedy's voice got very quiet. You enabled a sexual predator. When women accused him, you attacked them. When he was caught, you blamed conspiracies. Then years later, you wrapped yourself in Me Too and claimed to champion women. Ma'am, that's not just hypocrisy. That's betraying every woman who's ever been victimized just to protect your ticket to power. Hillary's voice when she finally spoke was ice cold. My marriage is not your business. Your marriage is a political arrangement, Kennedy said. Everyone knows it. Everyone can see it. You stayed because leaving would have ended your career. You needed him more than you needed dignity. And you were willing to destroy other women to keep that arrangement intact. That's not standing by your man, ma'am. That's sacrificing other women for your ambition. 6 rounds. Hillary's feminist credentials were demolished. The woman who claimed to champion women had spent decades destroying them. 2 more rounds to go. And Kennedy was saving the best for last. The senator pulled out a worn paperback book, set it on the table between them. The title was visible to the cameras. What Happened by Hillary Rodham Clinton. Ma'am, you wrote a whole book about why you lost the 2016 election. I read it. Took me a while. It's over 500 pages of blaming everyone except the person responsible. So let me save folks some time and give you the short version. You lost because voters didn't want you. That's it. That's the whole story. He opened the book to marked pages, post-it notes sticking out, highlighted passages. In here you blame James Comey, you blame Russia, you blame WikiLeaks, you blame Bernie Sanders, you blame Jill Stein, you blame sexism, You blame the media. You blame voter suppression. You blame the Electoral College. You blame everyone except Hillary Clinton. But let's talk about why you actually lost. Kennedy pulled out campaign data, maps, polling numbers, vote totals. You called half of Trump supporters deplorables. Basket of deplorables. You actually said that. You insulted tens of millions of Americans for considering voting for your opponent. That's not campaigning, ma'am. That's contempt. And voters noticed. They remembered. He showed a map of Wisconsin. Wisconsin. You didn't visit it once during the general election. Not once. That's a state that had voted Democrat for decades. Your campaign told you to go there. Your own people warned you it was slipping. The data showed Trump was making inroads. You ignored them. You thought it was in the bag. You lost Wisconsin by 22,748 votes. Maybe if you'd bothered to show up, you could have found 23,000 votes. Maybe if you'd acted like those voters mattered, they would have voted for you. Michigan and Pennsylvania, Kennedy continued. Same story. You took working-class voters for granted. You figured they'd vote Democrat like they always had, but they didn't. They voted for Trump. Why? Because he showed up. He talked to them. He listened to them. You talked down to them. You dismissed their concerns. You called them deplorable. Kennedy pulled out transcripts of her Wall Street speeches, the ones she'd tried to keep secret. You gave speeches to Goldman Sachs and other banks for $225,000 each. You made millions talking to the people who caused the 2008 financial crisis, the people who destroyed the economy, the people who foreclosed on working Americans' homes. Then your transcripts leaked, and voters read that you told those bankers you have public positions and private positions. You admitted to them that you lie to voters, that you say one thing publicly and another thing privately. Kennedy looked at her. Ma'am, that's not sophisticated politics. That's admitting you're dishonest, and voters don't like dishonest. He showed her favorability ratings over time. The downward trend was unmistakable. You entered 2016 with the highest unfavorability ratings of any Democratic nominee in modern history. Decades of scandals we've covered, most of them tonight, had destroyed your credibility. Most Americans simply didn't trust you, not because of sexism, because of your record. And you know what? Kennedy said, you still might have one, despite all of that, despite the baggage, despite the scandals, despite the unfavorability. But you ran a terrible campaign. You couldn't articulate why you wanted to be president. Everything was about it being your turn. You'd paid your dues. You'd waited. You'd suffered through Bill's presidency and the humiliation and the scandals. You deserved it. But ma'am, the presidency isn't about what you deserve. It's about what Americans need. And you never made the case for what you'd do for them, only what they owed you. He leaned forward. You came across as entitled, inauthentic, out of touch. You tried to connect with young people by talking about Pokémon Go. You told people to Pokémon Go to the polls. That's not connecting, ma'am. That's pandering, and bad pandering at that. So you lost. You lost to a reality TV star with no political experience. A man who'd never held office, a man who said outrageous things, a man your entire party said was unqualified. And instead of looking in the mirror and asking what you did wrong, you wrote a 500-page book blaming everyone else. Kennedy picked up the book. The title is What Happened. I can tell you what happened in one sentence. Voters rejected 30 years of Clinton corruption, entitlement, and dishonesty. That's what happened. And you still can't admit it. 7 rounds, 1 more to go, the Louisiana finale. Kennedy set down his legal pad. For the first time all night, he didn't consult his notes. He'd been waiting for this moment for 30 years, building to this. Every question, every fact, every documented scandal, all leading here. Secretary Clinton, you've been in public life since 1992. That's 32 years, more than 3 decades. So I've been thinking, what's your legacy? What will history remember about Hillary Clinton? He started counting on his fingers. Whitewater, Travelgate, the Rose law firm billing records that mysteriously appeared in the White House residence after being subpoenaed for 2 years. The cattle futures trading where you somehow turned $1,000 into $100,000 with no experience. FBI files on political opponents found in the White House. Vince Foster's death and all the questions around it. The missing emails from the Arkansas governor's mansion. Then as First Lady, Kennedy continued, your healthcare reform effort that failed so spectacularly that Democrats lost Congress for the first time in 40 years. Your husband's impeachment that you defended by attacking his victims. Your carpetbag Senate run in New York, a state you'd never lived in. As senator, he went on, your vote for the Iraq War that you later regretted when it became politically inconvenient. Your campaign in 2008 where you questioned whether Obama was really a Muslim, where you ran racist ads, where you refused to concede even after you'd lost, and you still lost. As Secretary of State, Kennedy's voice got harder. Benghazi, 4 dead Americans, lies to their families, the email server in your basement, 33,000 deleted emails, the Clinton Foundation pay-to-play schemes, Uranium One, Libya destroyed into chaos with slave markets, the Russian reset that made things worse, the Syria red line that made America look weak. Then 2016, rigging the primary against Bernie, getting debate questions in advance, losing to Trump despite every advantage, writing a book blaming everyone but yourself, spending 4 years claiming the election was stolen by Russia, undermining the very democracy you claim to defend. He looked at her steadily. That's your legacy, ma'am. 32 years of scandal, corruption, lying, enabling predators, getting Americans killed, destroying evidence, selling influence, and never, not once, taking responsibility for any of it. Kennedy's voice got quiet, reflective. You know what the pattern is, what connects all of this. Rules don't apply to Clintons, you set up a private server. No consequences, you destroy subpoenaed evidence. No consequences, you take foreign money while making policy. No consequences, you rig a primary. No consequences, you lie to Congress. No consequences, you lie to the FBI. No consequences, you lie to families of dead Americans. No consequences. Until November 8, 2016. He paused. That's when you finally faced accountability. Not from prosecutors or Congress or the media who protected you for decades. From voters. Regular Americans who looked at 30 years of Clinton corruption and said no thanks. That was the only real accountability you've ever faced, and you still can't accept it. Kennedy stood up, all 6'1" of him, unfolding from his chair with that deliberate Louisiana slowness. Ma'am, I'm going to be real honest with you now if you don't mind. Where I come from in Louisiana, we believe in a few simple things. Tell the truth, keep your word, take responsibility for your mistakes, treat people with respect. You've spent 32 years doing the opposite of all of that. You lie, then you lie about lying. You make promises, then break them when convenient. You never admit mistakes. You blame others, and you treat people with contempt, especially the people who work for you, the people who trusted you, the people you were supposed to serve. His voice got softer but more intense. You've proven one thing, though. You've proven that if you're rich enough, powerful enough, connected enough, and shameless enough, you can get away with almost anything in this country. Almost. Because there's one thing you can't escape, the voters. And when they finally got their say, when they finally had a chance to judge you, they rejected you. Soundly, completely, decisively. That wasn't Russia, ma'am. That wasn't Khmer. That wasn't sexism. That was Americans who'd watched you for 30 years and decided that they'd seen enough. That was democracy, real democracy. The kind you claim to defend but actually tried to rig. And democracy said no. Kennedy picked up his legal pad. You came here tonight thinking you'd remind people why you should still be relevant, why your voice still matters, why they should still listen to you. Instead, you've reminded them why they were right to reject you. Your legacy isn't breaking glass ceilings, ma'am. Your legacy is proving that corruption, even when protected by power and wealth and political connections, can still be recognized and rejected by regular Americans who just want leaders who tell the truth and follow the law. He looked at her one last time. Those friendly Louisiana eyes were cold now, prosecutorial, final. I'm just a simple country lawyer from Louisiana. But even I can see that 32 years of scandal isn't bad luck. It's character. And your character has been on display for 3 decades. America has seen enough. The audience erupted, half in thunderous applause that went on, half in stunned silence, mouths open, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. All of them knowing they'd seen something historic, something that would be replayed and discussed and debated for years. A complete dismantling of a political legacy by someone who sounded like he was just explaining why the fishing wasn't good this season. Hillary sat frozen, her navy blue pantsuit suddenly looking less like armor and more like the emperor's new clothes. She'd come to remind America of her experience, her service, her qualifications. She was leaving as a reminder of why experience without integrity is just experienced corruption. Senator John Kennedy closed his legal pad, adjusted his glasses one last time, and walked off that stage with that unhurried Louisiana stride, looking like someone who just finished a pleasant conversation about the weather instead of having systematically destroyed 32 years of political mythology. The video went viral at a speed that made social media platforms crash. Within 4 hours, it had 180 million views. Within 12 hours, it was the most watched political content in internet history. Within 24 hours, even CNN, which had hosted the debate, was playing clips with chyrons like Clinton's struggles with tough questions and Senator Kennedy's devastating fact check. But it wasn't the views that mattered. It was the comments, thousands upon thousands, from Democrats saying things like, "I voted for her, but Kennedy is right. Why didn't anyone ask these questions before? I feel betrayed." From independents saying this is what accountability looks like. From people across the political spectrum agreeing that regardless of party, corruption is corruption and lies are lies. The Louisiana lesson became the name everyone used. Not because Kennedy had lectured he hadn't, but because he taught America something it should have known all along. That Southern manners and devastating truth-telling aren't opposites. Sometimes the nicest thing you can do for someone is tell them the truth they've been avoiding for decades. Hillary's remaining political capital evaporated overnight. The speeches she'd been giving for $250,000, canceled. The book tour she'd planned, ended early. The podcast she'd started, quietly discontinued. The political commentary gigs, networks suddenly discovered they had enough contributors. But the real damage was to her legacy. For 30 years, she'd crafted an image. First female major party nominee, former Secretary of State, champion of women, experienced leader, someone who deserved power because of what she'd endured. Kennedy had dismantled all of it using nothing but her own record. And that Louisiana drawl that made devastating facts sound like friendly advice. The Clinton Foundation, already declining, announced it would wind down operations within 6 months. Donations had dropped 95% after the debate. Nobody wanted to be associated with what Kennedy had called pay-to-play with better PR. Democratic Party leaders found themselves in an awkward position. They defended Hillary for years, covered for her scandals, blamed her critics, attacked anyone who questioned her. Now even their own voters were asking, "Why didn't you tell us? Why did you protect her? Why did you lie to us about who she really was?" The progressive wing of the party used the moment to purge Clintonism from Democratic politics. The Clinton way became synonymous with corruption, with entitlement, with putting personal ambition above public service. Senator Kennedy's stature grew, but in a uniquely Louisiana way. He didn't brag, he didn't gloat, he didn't go on a victory tour. When asked about the debate weeks later, he just said, "I asked some questions that needed asking." If folks found that uncomfortable, well, sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, but it's still the truth. His folksy demeanor became a political force. Other Republicans started trying to copy it, and failing, because you can't fake authenticity. You can't manufacture the kind of integrity that comes from genuinely believing in what you're saying and backing it up with facts. Kennedy'd entered the political lexicon. It meant destroyed politely with facts. As in, "Did you see that hearing?" Senator Johnson completely Kennedy'd that witness. 6 months later, CNN did a retrospective on the debate. Their own polling showed it had shifted public opinion on Hillary Clinton more than any other single event in her career. Not because Kennedy had been mean, he'd been unfailingly polite, but because he'd been thorough, factual, and devastating. The Harvard Kennedy School No Relation used the debate in its political communication classes as an example of effective rhetoric. Notice, professors would say, he never raises his voice. He never insults her personally. He just presents her own record and lets it speak for itself. That's more powerful than any attack. That's the difference between persuasion and performance. A year later, someone asked Kennedy if he had any regrets about how tough he'd been on Hillary. He thought for a moment, then said in that drawl, "Well, I wasn't trying to be tough. I was trying to be honest. And if being honest about someone's record seems tough, maybe the problem isn't the honesty. Maybe the problem is the record." That quote got 50 million views. Hillary Clinton largely disappeared from public life. Occasional opinion pieces in friendly outlets like The Guardian or The Nation. Rare interviews where she'd discuss anything except her record. A quiet retirement in Chappaqua, surrounded by the wealth she'd accumulated through 3 decades of public service. The wealth she couldn't quite explain. The woman who wanted to be remembered as a trailblazer was instead remembered as a cautionary tale. Not about gender, plenty of women in politics were thriving. About corruption. About entitlement. About the dangers of protecting politicians from accountability because of their power or connections. Senator Kennedy went back to Louisiana. Back to driving his pickup truck with the check engine light still on. Back to speaking in that drawl that made complicated things sound simple and simple truths sound profound. He'd done what needed doing, held power accountable with nothing but facts and Southern courtesy. Senator John Kennedy proved something remarkable that night. You don't need to yell to be heard. You don't need to insult to be effective. You don't need to be cruel to be honest. You just need facts, preparation, and the courage to present them clearly, even when they're uncomfortable, even when they're about powerful people, even when the consequences might be severe. Hillary Clinton represented everything Americans distrust about Washington: corruption protected by power, rules that don't apply equally, scandals that never result in consequences, lies that are never called lies, 32 years of operating above the law while claiming to serve the public. Kennedy didn't destroy her with attacks or conspiracies or unproven theories. He destroyed her with her own record, delivered in a Louisiana drawl that made it sound like he was just explaining basic facts to someone who should already know them. Share this with everyone who believes in accountability regardless of power. Comment below. Should there be a statute of limitations on Clinton scandals, or does corruption remain corruption no matter how much time passes? Because Senator Kennedy proved that night what many had suspected for years. The facts about Hillary Clinton were worse than the conspiracies. The documented record was more damning than any theory. The truth was more devastating than any attack. And sometimes all you need to expose corruption is a country lawyer with a legal pad and a drawl. Facts don't care about your pantsuit. They don't care about your resume. They don't care about your political power or your connections or how many magazines put you on the cover. They just are. And when someone has the courtesy to present them clearly, even the most powerful people discover that truth is the ultimate accountability. The Louisiana lesson wasn't about politics. It wasn't about Republican versus Democrat. It wasn't about left versus right. It was about character. And in that CNN studio on that night, America learned that character or lack thereof eventually catches up to everyone. Even Clintons. Especially Clintons.